He thought he was helping a stranger until he discovered the shocking truth that would change his family forever. The sun shone brightly outside the bustling supermarket where the sounds of chatter and the clinking of shopping carts filled the air. David, a devoted father, held his daughter Lily's hand as they stepped into the store, the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting toward them like a warm embrace. Today was special. They were on a mission to buy a cake for David's father, who was recovering from surgery and had a particular fondness for sweets. "Dad, can we go to the bakery first?" Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and David couldn't help but smile at her eagerness. "Of course, sweetheart," he replied, gently squeezing her hand. "Let's see what they have." As they made their way through the aisles, the vibrant colors of the products seemed to dance in Lily's eyes. She tugged on his arm, pointing towards the bakery section. "Look, Dad, the cakes are over there." The bakery was a visual feast. Rows of cakes adorned the shelves, each one more enticing than the last. David watched as Lily's gaze flitted from one dessert to another, her little face lighting up with each new discovery. They approached the counter, and the display presented a dazzling array of confections. Vanilla, red velvet, and the one that caught Lily's attention, a luscious chocolate cake, rich and decadent, with swirls of glossy frosting. "Can we get that one, Dad? It looks just like the one Grandpa loves," Lily exclaimed, practically bouncing on her toes. David glanced at the cake, feeling a surge of affection for his father. "That's a great choice, Lily. Grandpa will be so happy," he said as he lifted the cake from the display and placed it gently into their cart. The sight of it made him imagine his father's delighted smile, and for a moment all worries faded away. With their cart now filled with groceries and the prize cake, they made their way to the checkout line. David began to feel a swell of pride. He was doing this for his father, and it felt good to bring a little sweetness into his life, especially after the surgery. He turned to Lily, who was chatting excitedly about the cake and how they would surprise Grandpa. "Just imagine his face when he sees this cake." Lily giggled, her innocent joy lighting up David's heart. As they approached the cashier, David's stomach knotted. He reached for his wallet, counting the bills in his mind. The cheerful beep of the scanner and the hum of conversation around them faded into a distant murmur. He quickly realized that the money he had wasn't enough, not for the cake and the groceries. Panic surged through him. "Dad, what's wrong?" Lily asked, sensing her father's sudden silence. Nothing, sweetie. Just, let's put this cake back for a moment," he said. His voice strained as he pointed towards the cake. "Why? I thought we were buying it." Her face fell, confusion swirling in her bright eyes. "I know, honey, but—" David hesitated, feeling the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. He thought of his father, who always found joy in the simplest things, and how much he deserved this small treat. But the reality was harsh. "We just can't afford it right now." Lily's expression shifted from confusion to sadness, her lower lip trembling. "But I wanted to make Grandpa happy. He loves chocolate cake." "I know, Lily. And we will find a way to make him happy, I promise," David replied, trying to muster a reassuring smile, though his heart felt heavy. The thought of disappointing his daughter and his father was almost unbearable. As they stood in line, David glanced around, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The bustling supermarket, once filled with excitement, now felt overwhelming and isolating. He swallowed hard, wishing for a miracle that could save the day. Just then, a stranger in line behind them caught his eye, and David couldn't shake the feeling that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. David knelt down beside Lily, his heart heavy with disappointment. Her small face, once lit up with excitement at the prospect of the chocolate cake, now reflected confusion and sadness. "Dad, why can't we get the cake?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. With a sigh, David took a moment to collect his thoughts. "Sweetheart, I just checked the prices and we don't have enough money today," he replied, trying to mask the sadness in his own voice. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The cake was not just a treat. It was a symbol of love and care for his father, who had always indulged in sweets despite his health issues. David's heart ached at the thought of disappointing both Lily and his father. "But Grandpa loves chocolate cake. We can't just leave it here," she insisted, her big blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know, honey, I know," he said softly, brushing her hair back with his hand. "But we'll figure something out. Maybe we can bake him a cake at home next time, or we can make some cookies together." Lily's brow furrowed as she considered his suggestion. "But it's not the same," she replied, a quiver in her voice. David felt a pang of guilt, wishing he could do more. I promise we'll make it special for him just like he deserves, he assured her, gripping her small hand gently. He led her back towards the bakery section where they reluctantly placed the precious cake back on the shelf. Every step away felt like a small fracture in their hearts. As they walked through the crowded aisles, David's mind was still racing with the disappointment of the day. They rounded a corner, and he noticed an elderly man in front of them fumbling with a handful of coins at the checkout. The man's hands trembled as he counted, trying to make the numbers add up. David's heart clenched at the sight. He could easily see the struggle etched in the man's weathered face. "Come on, buddy, you can do this," the cashier said, her voice filled with patience. David felt an urge to help, but as he glanced down at his own empty wallet, the feeling faded. They were just as strapped for cash. "Dad, can we help him?" Lily asked, her voice full of innocence and hope. David shook his head slowly. "I wish we could, sweetheart, but we can't even help ourselves right now," he said, his voice thick. They stepped outside, the cool breeze brushing against their faces as they left the supermarket. David took a deep breath, trying to shake off the gloom that had settled over him. Just then, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me." A man approached them with a warm smile. He looked to be in his 40s, with kind eyes and an air of sincerity. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation inside." David felt a flicker of hope. "Yes?" "I'm Thomas," the man introduced himself, extending a hand. "I'd like to help you out today. I can cover your groceries, including that wonderful cake you were looking at." David's mouth fell slightly open in disbelief. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly—" "Please, let me. It's just a small act of kindness. I believe in paying it forward," Thomas insisted, his tone genuine and warm. Lily looked up at her father, her eyes wide with surprise. "Dad, can we, please?" David hesitated, feeling a rush of gratitude mixed with reluctance. I don't know what to say," he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just say yes," Thomas encouraged, his smile unwavering. "It would mean a lot to me to help you today." With a glance at Lily, whose hopeful expression tugged at his heart, David nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you, we really appreciate it," he said, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift. As they moved to the side to let Thomas take care of the payment, David felt a strange connection forming with this stranger. There was something in Thomas's demeanor that spoke of shared experiences and compassion. "Thank you for your kindness," David said, his voice steadying. Thomas shook his head, still smiling. "It's my pleasure. You know, when I was a kid, I had a similar experience. A stranger helped my mother and me when we were struggling. It changed my perspective on life." David raised an eyebrow, curious to hear more. "What happened?" And as Thomas began to share his story, David felt a warmth spread through him, realizing that kindness had a way of weaving lives together, even in the most unexpected circumstances. David stood in the supermarket, flabbergasted by the unexpected generosity of Thomas. The weight of his worries had lifted momentarily, but he still felt the need to understand this kind stranger better. He nodded appreciatively, gesturing for Thomas to step aside with him and Lily, who was still clutching the cake box with wide, innocent eyes. "Thank you so much for your kindness," David said, his voice thick with gratitude. "It means more than you know." Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's my pleasure, really. It reminds me of a time when I was just a kid. My mother and I were struggling to make ends meet after my father passed away. One day we were at a grocery store much like this one, and we were short on cash. I remember my mother's face filled with worry. Suddenly, an elderly gentleman came up to us and paid for our groceries. That small act of kindness changed everything for us." David listened intently, his heart swelling with empathy. "What happened next?" he asked, genuinely intrigued. Thomas chuckled softly, as if reliving a cherished memory. "Well, my mother was so touched that she decided to pay it forward. She started volunteering at a local shelter, helping other families in need. I remember helping her bake cookies for the kids there. That's when I realized how powerful kindness can be. It inspired me to look for ways to help others in my life." Lily, who had been quietly absorbing the conversation, piped up, "So, you're like a superhero for kindness?" Thomas laughed, a warm and hearty sound that made David smile. "You could say that, Lily. We can all be superheroes in our own way. Sometimes, it just takes a little bit of courage to reach out and help someone else." David felt a sense of connection growing between them, a bond forged through shared experiences of kindness and compassion. I wish I had known that earlier. I've been so caught up in my own troubles, I didn't realize how much a little kindness could mean. Trust me, it's easy to get lost in our own worlds, Thomas replied. But every time we extend a hand, we create ripples that can touch lives in ways we might never know. Just look at how your daughter's face lights up. That joy spreads like wildfire. Lily beamed, her eyes sparkling with admiration for Thomas. I want to help people too. Maybe I can bake cookies like you and your mom did. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Thomas encouraged, his voice filled with enthusiasm. Start small, Lily. Even a smile or a kind word can make a difference. You'll be amazed at how far it can go. As the three of them stood there, a sense of warmth enveloped them. David felt the burdens he had been carrying begin to dissipate, replaced by a newfound hope. You know, this day didn't turn out how I expected, he confessed. I thought we'd leave without the cake and feeling defeated, but instead we've been reminded of the goodness in people. Thomas nodded, his expression earnest. Life has a way of surprising us. It's important to stay open to those surprises. You never know when a simple act of kindness might change your path. With their groceries in hand, David and Lily thanked Thomas profusely once more, their voices mingling in a chorus of gratitude. You've made our day so much brighter, David said, shaking Thomas's hand firmly, feeling an unspoken bond of friendship form between them. As they parted ways, David reflected on the lesson he had learned. Kindness indeed had the power to create a ripple effect, transforming lives and bridging gaps. He glanced down at Lily, who was now skipping ahead, her joy palpable. In that moment, he knew he wanted to instill that same spirit of kindness in her, to nurture it as they continued their journey together. Let's go home and surprise Grandpa with this cake, David said, a smile spreading across his face. He'll be so happy. Lily nodded enthusiastically, her laughter echoing in the air. And we can tell him all about our superhero friend. As they walked toward the car, David felt a lightness in his heart, a reminder that even in the toughest times, kindness could forge connections and spark hope, illuminating the darkest of days. As they stepped through the front door, the warm scent of home enveloped David and Lily. The late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes in the air and casting a cozy glow around them. Lily skipped ahead, her excitement palpable as she clutched the cake box tightly, a smile spreading across her face. Daddy, I can't wait to see Grandpa's face when he sees this, she exclaimed, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. David chuckled softly, his heart swelling with pride and love for his daughter. Me too, sweetheart. I think he's going to love it, he replied, setting the grocery bags down on the kitchen counter. He couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope after their encounter with Thomas. It was as if the weight of the world had lifted just a little, and he was eager to share this small joy with his father. Let's get everything ready, Lily said, her eyes sparkling with determination. She hopped onto her tiptoes to reach for the cake box, and David couldn't resist the urge to help her. Okay, let's get it out and set the table. We want to make it special for him, he said, guiding her to the dining room. They worked together, arranging the small table with care. Lily placed the cake at the center, a beautiful chocolate creation adorned with delicate swirls of frosting. It looks just like the ones we used to make together, she said, her voice dreamy as she recalled her grandfather's stories of baking in the kitchen. Do you think he'll tell us more stories today? I hope so, Lily. Grandpa loves sharing those memories with you, David replied, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. He remembered the countless afternoons spent listening to his father recount tales of his own childhood, the laughter echoing through the house. It was moments like these that David cherished most, the threads of family woven tightly together. As they finished setting the table, David called out, "Dad, we're home." The sound of his voice reverberated through the living room where his father sat in his favorite armchair, the soft fabric worn from years of use. David noticed the way his father looked up, curiosity brightening his tired eyes. There was something comforting about that familiar gaze, a reassurance that everything would be all right. "Is that you, David?" Grandpa's voice was warm, though tinged with the vulnerability that often accompanied his recovery. He adjusted himself in the chair, leaning forward slightly, eager to see what they had brought home. Lily has a surprise for you, David announced, a grin spreading across his face. He stepped aside, allowing Lily to take the lead. With a flourish, she lifted the cake box and opened it, revealing the sweet treat within. Ta-da! Look what we got for you, Grandpa, she exclaimed, her eyes wide with anticipation. The moment the cake was unveiled, Grandpa's face transformed. His eyes lit up and a broad smile broke across his face. Well, would you look at that, a chocolate cake, just for me, he said, his voice filled with joy. The pain that often shadowed his features seemed to dissipate in an instant, replaced by the sheer delight of the moment. Of course, we wanted to bring you something special, Lily said, practically bouncing on her feet. Remember when we used to bake together? We thought you'd like this. Grandpa chuckled, a sound that resonated with warmth. Oh, I certainly do. Those were some of the best times, weren't they? You were quite the little chef. He leaned back in his chair, reminiscing. I still remember that time we made a cake for your mother's birthday. It was a disaster, but we laughed so hard. Lily giggled, her laughter mingling with her grandfather's. And you let me put too much frosting on it. It was like eating a sugar mountain. Exactly, but we enjoyed every bite, didn't we? He replied, his eyes twinkling as he leaned closer to the cake. You know, there's something magical about baking together. It's not just about the cake, it's about the time spent together. David watched the exchange, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. Here, in this small moment, he could see the bond between his daughter and father growing stronger. The cake was more than just a dessert, it was a bridge connecting generations filled with memories and love. As they settled around the table, David couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The day had started with uncertainty, but now, surrounded by the warmth of family and the sweetness of chocolate cake, he realized that kindness had a way of transforming moments, no matter how challenging life could be. As they savored the rich chocolate cake, the sweet aroma filled the living room, mingling with the warmth of family bonds. Grandpa sat back in his armchair, a slice of cake in hand, his face radiating contentment. You know, this reminds me of a time long ago, he began, his voice a soft, nostalgic murmur. David and Lily leaned in, their eyes sparkling with curiosity. What was it, Grandpa? Lily asked, her mouth still half full of cake. She was always eager to hear her grandfather's stories, each one a window into a world that felt both distant and familiar. Grandpa chuckled, the sound rich with memories. When I was a young man, I was walking home one evening and I noticed a woman sitting on a bench crying. She looked so lost and I thought I should just keep walking. But something pulled at me and I stopped. He paused, his gaze drifting as if he were transported back to that moment. I went over and asked her what was wrong. She told me she had lost her job and didn't know how she would feed her children that night. David felt a lump form in his throat, struck by the weight of his father's words. What did you do? He asked, genuinely intrigued. I didn't have much money myself at the time, Grandpa continued, but I remembered how my mother taught me to always lend a hand when someone is in need. So I reached into my pocket and handed her the little I had. It wasn't much, but she burst into tears and thanked me profusely. It turned out she was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Lily's eyes widened. Wow, Grandpa, you helped her? Yes, I did. And you know what? A few weeks later, I saw her again, but this time she was smiling. She told me she'd found a new job and could now buy food for her children. That moment stayed with me for the rest of my life. It taught me that kindness, no matter how small, can change someone's world. David smiled, feeling a surge of pride for his father. It's incredible how a simple act can create such a profound impact, just like how Thomas helped us today. Exactly, Grandpa nodded, taking another bite of cake. Kindness is a ripple effect. You never know who you might inspire. As they basked in the warmth of the moment, the doorbell rang, cutting through the cozy atmosphere. David glanced at Grandpa and Lily, who exchanged curious looks. I'll get it, David said, setting his plate down and heading towards the door. When he opened it, he was taken aback to find Thomas standing there, a box of pastries in his hands. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said with a warm, approachable smile. I thought I'd bring some treats to share and continue our conversation. David's heart swelled with gratitude. Not at all, please come in. He stepped aside, allowing Thomas to enter. Lily jumped up from her seat, her face lighting up with delight at the sight of the pastries. Wow, look at all those goodies, she exclaimed, clapping her hands. Thomas chuckled, placing the box on the table. I thought you might enjoy a little something sweet to go with your cake. It's always nice to celebrate kindness, isn't it? Absolutely, Lily replied, her enthusiasm infectious. We were just hearing Grandpa's story about helping someone in need. Those stories are the best, Thomas said, settling into a chair as David and Lily returned to their seats. I have plenty of my own to share too. As they dug into the pastries, the atmosphere shifted to one of celebration and connection. Grandpa began reminiscing about his younger days, sharing tales of his own childhood adventures, and the family listened intently, laughter bubbling up amidst the storytelling. Back in my day, we didn't have all these fancy stores, Grandpa said with a twinkle in his eye. We made our own fun. I remember building a treehouse with my friends. It was the best clubhouse in the neighborhood. David watched as Lily's eyes sparkled with wonder, her mind racing with images of treehouses and adventures. The evening unfolded in a beautiful tapestry of shared stories, laughter, and the sweet taste of pastries and cake. It was a moment that felt timeless, a celebration of kindness, family, and the bonds that, like the cake they enjoyed, were sweetened by love and compassion. As the laughter and chatter began to fade and the last crumbs of cake were devoured, Thomas looked around the cozy living room, soaking in the warmth of the family atmosphere. Suddenly, his expression shifted, a hint of hesitation crossing his face. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of David, Lily, and Grandpa. Can I share something with you all? He asked, his voice steady but laced with emotion. David nodded, intrigued. Lily, who had been busy licking frosting off her fingers, suddenly sat up straight, sensing the seriousness in the air. Of course, Thomas. What is it? David prompted, curious about what could possibly follow such a joyful evening. Thomas took a deep breath, the weight of his words heavy on his heart. I know we just met, but I have to tell you, my name isn't actually Thomas. He paused, gauging their reactions. David and Grandpa exchanged glances, confusion etched on their faces. Lily, still unaware of the implications, tilted her head, puzzled. My name is Jacob, he continued, swallowing hard. Jacob Miller. I'm your brother, David. The room fell silent, the air thick with shock. David's mouth fell open, his mind racing to process the revelation. Jacob? His brother who had left years ago after a family dispute, the one who had seemingly vanished without a trace. Jacob, David repeated incredulously, but how could you, why didn't you ever reach out? His heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over him, anger, disbelief, a flicker of hope. I had to find myself, Jacob said softly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. After everything that happened, I thought it would be easier to start fresh. I changed my name, moved away, and tried to leave the past behind, but I never forgot about you or Grandpa. I wanted to come back, but I didn't know how. Grandpa, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, his voice trembling. David, I remember how hard it was when Jacob left. We lost a part of our family that day. He looked at Jacob, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and yearning. But to see you here now, it feels like a miracle. Jacob stepped closer to them, vulnerability evident in his stance. I've spent years reflecting on what family means. I've seen kindness in unexpected places like what I did for you today. It reminded me of the love we once shared. David felt a rush of emotion, his heart aching for the brother he had lost and the time that had slipped away. I thought I was angry at you, he admitted, his voice thick with unshed tears, but maybe I was just hurt. I never wanted to lose you. Lily, sensing the gravity of the moment, took a step forward. Uncle Jacob, she said sweetly, her innocence shining through the somber atmosphere, you can come to our house any time. We can bake cakes together. The simple declaration broke the tension in the room, and a smile broke through Jacob's somber expression. I would love that, Lily, he said, his voice tinged with warmth. I've missed so much. In that moment, David and Grandpa took a step toward Jacob, enveloping him in a collective embrace. Tears flowed freely now, not just from sadness, but from the relief of reconnection. We've missed you too, Grandpa whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As they held each other, the bond that had been fractured for years began to mend. They felt the power of kindness, not just the kindness of strangers, but the kindness that comes from understanding, forgiveness, and love. Let's not let another moment pass us by, David said, pulling back to look Jacob in the eyes. Let's create new memories together, starting now. Jacob nodded, a smile breaking through his tears. I'd like that very much. With renewed hope and warmth in their hearts, the family settled back into the living room, laughter filling the air once more. They began to share stories, not just of the past, but dreams for the future. Of cakes to bake, memories to make, and a family reunited by the power of kindness and love. It was a night they would all remember, not just for the sweetness of the cake, but for the sweetness of family restored. The conclusion is, the transformative power of kindness can change lives in unexpected ways. He reminds us that, even in the greatest difficulties, a simple gesture of generosity can rekindle hope and heal deep wounds. The text highlights how forgiveness and family reunion can rebuild lost bonds, bringing to light the true meaning of love, empathy, and reconciliation, showing that it is never too late to rediscover the value of a family.